Ben,
Hello, David.
how are you? It's good to sit here in the chapel. This is Ben Sayevich, my former teacher, and now one of my best friends. I think at this point we can say we're almost like family.
Absolutely.
And I studied with you, I think it was in 2012 when I started, and until 2015 when you helped me get out into the real world. Really, I would say one of the most influential people in my life, not just in violin, but definitely in violin and in music. So I'm really happy that we're able to sit here and have a discussion and talk about some things. Why don't we start from talking about the school, the International Center for Music? How did it start? What makes it different from other conservatories?
Well, first of all, thank you for the inflated comments, but I do appreciate it. Um, well, the school started by my friend Stanislav Yudenich in 2003, but it only started as at a school that had no any history of any music programs. So it was in some ways a blessing in disguise in a way, because they didn't have any history before, and it started because he wanted to bring some students. He just won the Van Cliburn competition, and he wanted to bring some very students like my wife Lolita from Russia and from different parts of the world. And he basically, it started as a piano studio. But we lived in the same city, in Kansas City, and we were friends already for a few years. And I was teaching his daughter, who is Masha, Maria
You taught her
Yudenich.
for 10 years.
Yes, so we also became very friendly, and we played together quite a bit. And he started twisting my arm gradually. So, because I was teaching at KU, as you
Yeah.
know. And I was starting to twist my arm, so for me to do the same thing, to start a violin studio. So that he, and 2 years later, I took a chance and I left a full-time 10-year position that I worked at KU already at that time for 17 years. And I took a chance, and we basically started from scratch. We had a president that was very supportive, loved music, and she saw that the music will enhance. It was actually the biggest outreach was the work with the military. And it was considered at that time the second school online in the United States for military. You know, the Iraq war was going on, and so they were working with people. All kinds of generals would get degrees, and suddenly they
Really?
have a music program. so, so it was
Interesting.
it was a very nice thing, and gradually we started to have also we brought a cellist and a violist, and so we started to kind of have I would say a boutique music school.
You had a lot of success. I
And
mean,
we had
the rate at which
percentage-wise, but
percentage.
we still have about 28 students, and we don't really want to grow that much because it has a very special, when you asked what is unique about it. As you know, you were here for 3.5 years on this stage,
Yeah.
which is really available almost for every student. This is one of the unique things, that every student is able to have the stage and practice on the
I
stage.
practiced on this stage for hours.
Yeah,
Hours.
and that's a big advantage because many schools don't have that
You get to
luxury.
have a hall, you can hear yourself. Yeah, that's was yeah.
Yeah. So, of course, this is another thing which is very, it's a family. So we pick people that fit the family, you know. Sometimes the saying is that you cannot choose your family, but we do choose our families. And we
Well,
handpick each person that of course, by the most important thing, of course, it's their talent, but also.
well, your most recent success was Ilhom, who studied. When did he study? Started
Oh, he
with
came here when he was 17.
17, and how many years did he
He
study?
studied here for 5.5
Five and a
years.
half years, and now he has he just got the first position in the first violin section of Pittsburgh Symphony.
Yeah.
So that's pretty incredible.
Well, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think he's the fact that he's 23 years old only. That's. I'm very very happy,
Well, I mean,
pleased for him.
I've studied with several teachers. I'm grateful to all of them, but I feel like for me, when I studied with you, and I think you're one of the greatest teachers in the world, my opinion. But the thing that you were able to teach me was, and that I really learned from you was how to practice. And I didn't know how to practice. I was banging my head against the wall every difficult passage I had. And I think that gave me the ability to survive on my own, which I just didn't. I had the tools, I just didn't know how to,
Yeah.
you know,
There is.
approach in the practice room to approach the music in a logical, how to go through certain obstacles, and you taught me that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Well, there is this English saying, you are what you eat, and we say you play what you practice.
that's true. So why don't we give people a little bit of your background? Where were you born? Where did you grow up? What inspired you to pick up the fiddle?
I was born in the country, if anybody remembers, the Soviet Union. It's been but I was born in Lithuania, which is a small Baltic country with actually a great tradition of music. Not to mention Jascha Heifetz.
Yeah.
Yeah. But besides that, there are many, many people. There are a very big tradition of classical music. And my father was a choreographer. My oldest brother was a jazz pianist. So,
Great piano. I've heard him play.
yeah, well, yeah, I think so. And I was 6 years old, and somebody decided to take me to a David Oistrakh's concert. He came to our city. He played, and
Wow.
and that was basically ruined my life.
So what was it? What was it like hearing
Well, I'm
Oistrakh?
of
I
course
mean,
I'm this
no, of course, yeah, yeah.
joking. Yeah. Well,
In every joke, there's a little.
in every joke there is a bit of joke in it.
But so Oistrakh
So
was.
my impression of this concert, my impression of this concert was first just, I mean, I'm trying to recollect a child's impression, which sometimes is not so easy to do, but I'm trying to recollect what I thought at that time, not what I would think now. At that time, it looked to me like I was completely blown away by the fact that one person can cover over a huge orchestra. He played the Khachaturian concerto.
And he was also known for having a huge sound
And
too. Not just.
but not only that he had a huge sound, but it has with such an incredible thing, how to say, opulence to it, and radiation in it. And of course, I didn't understand anything about music then, but the quality of the warmth of the sound and how one person, not a giant of a person, but a relatively.
This also I'm sorry to interrupt, but this train brings back memories too. We would sit here, we would record, and then the train. But it doesn't come by very often.
But always in the quietest moment.
Always in the quietest moments. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, and I also realized that I was wondering, where is that warmth coming from? Why? How is it possible that the singing, the warmth, and the grandness of expression? And I then realized that he shakes the violin a little bit with his hands, you know. And I kind of intuitively thought, well, because of this, so then when I came home and I insisted for my parents to buy me a violin, and I had somebody gave me the kind of first lesson, I took the violin and I was shaking it in front of the mirror. And I was scratching away, but I remember that I had his tone didn't let me sleep for a few days. That was the impression that I do remember as a child, which I think probably is very, very important. So I was lucky enough that I was in between this generation that I could still hear. Had the privilege to hear some of, those greatest players. So that's why I started to play.
And I remember you once told me a long time ago, we were having a conversation about the older generation of musicians, that they each have a signature, each one of them had a signature to their tone. You could very clearly identify who was who. And I remember you said something about that part of what gave it was the suffering that they went through in their lives, especially during those times which were so difficult back then, living in the Soviet Union, or during the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. Do you think that life is too good for us now, or do you find that there was something in the way life was back then that helped give people a sense of identity in their playing, or was it a cultural thing, or was it a combination?
This is such
Because you can't deny, when you hear musicians back from even the 30s, the 40s, that they had something.
This is, of course, this very complicated question, and there is not one answer to it. And I only can say what I think. I mean, there is definitely a very big difference in the interpretive world of today, and I don't think it's better or worse, but it's very, very different. And the difference, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, is music became more of a mass production. And when there is, more kind of industrial. And when things become more industrial, there is a lot of copycatting. And, obviously, those old guys, they did not have the YouTube, they didn't have they didn't have CDs, they didn't even have before they didn't have anybody to imitate, number one, and their necessity was what was considered to be great playing in those days is first of all the personalized, tailored tone to each person that is connected to their soul, that can appeal to the general public, and that's something it was not like today's world. We have an incredible sense of when students study, they really, really, their first thing is to get into a position of some kind.
Right.
So they have to satisfy. They have to satisfy the people or the audience. Not the audience. They have to satisfy the jury members. They have to satisfy the audition committee. They have to satisfy, and for that, because of that, they want to be correct. They want to be, first of all, the most sub. Objective thing about string playing, of course, it's your intonation, your sense of rhythm, your dynamic, if you're doing orchestral auditions, your the dynamics of context, how you relate to, and then, there are so many people, very good people on YouTube who are concertmasters, and they show people how to play their excerpts, and they give them lessons, and so they play by the orders of somebody.
Do you think that because of the lack of back in the day, back in the old times, be, they didn't have access to recordings the same way we have now? We don't. They didn't have social media. There was no YouTube. There was no Instagram or Spotify. That forced them to invent things on their own and figure out
Absolutely.
their own
Absolutely.
way of
That is
approaching.
one thing. And also, if you take, for example, the Tchaikovsky concerto in the beginning of the 20th century, it was only 20 years old. And now it's
Contemporary music.
and now it's 150 years old.
Yeah.
When with 150 years old, you have thousands of people with traditions, and everybody. You don't. That's a problem in
But
our.
there's also a trend that I see where people want to be, because there's been a certain way of performing this piece hundreds and thousands of times already at this point, that they will go outside the box to the extreme where, oh, I've never heard it played that way, but it's a little bit.
That's very often the case as well, because
Yeah.
sometimes people
How
they
many
want.
times can you play the same thing in the same
Yeah,
way?
yeah. I mean, unless to be very genuine and and different, but not trying to be different, but to be very
Well, that's the
genuine,
thing. Yeah.
is extremely difficult, especially with a piece that is, I mean, I'm talking Tchaikovsky, but
Right.
every concerto is a standard in our repertoire, has been played millions and millions of times, and it's. I mean, you have to be very important thing is to find your own key.
Different but genuine. That's hard.
Yeah,
That's hard to find
different and
these days.
genuine, and that when I hear a young person play, and I'm sure you do as well, you immediately know when he plays by somebody else's behest, or by an order, or by a demand, or when he plays from his own musical channels. You can tell that right away. Anybody can tell. Maybe they don't know how it's called, but anybody can tell
Sure.
when somebody plays with his own
Thoughts.
thoughts and.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that brings me to my next question, which is, what do you find is the most challenging aspect about when you're teaching somebody?
That's you're asking such difficult questions. You really have to
We
take.
can sit here for hours
Yeah,
talking
yeah, yeah.
about it.
The most challenging for me is when I take a student into my class. I feel that he, in some ways, for this period of time that he studies with me, he puts his life in my hands, and I feel a lot of responsibility. And my first responsibility is for him to find a place in life, in the world of music. Um, I think that you have to be practical, and practical is you want that your person that you work with will be able to put a piece of bread on the table and maybe a little bit butter as well. you know, uh, that means there is certain.
Well, it's difficult
It's
nowadays.
it's incredibly difficult in both physically. It's very difficult for people, and psychologically, it's very difficult because there's so many people playing and so many people playing well.
Do you think it's more difficult today than it was
Yes,
60 years ago?
yes. To get a position or to be kind of recognized or just to work, I think it's more difficult than there's different criteria. Even from my time, it's different criteria. So first of all, the pool, everything is a boxing match. And unfortunately, any audition, any competition, I mean, how is your success? You have to beat the other guy, you know.
Yeah.
And basically, if you call it the way it is, and that's so unartistic and it's so unmusical, but that's an element that we have to face. So when you say what is the most challenging thing, first thing you have to make sure that the person plays with command over the instrument, because if you don't have a command over the instrument, so you have to know how to, the basic things, you know, you have to play really well in tune. And you have to play with a decent, hygienic tone, with good grammar. And but you know, those are simple things, but it's so incredibly difficult to rhythm and also to be able to read the our you know, our music, our gospel of the composers correctly.
How do you, let's say you have somebody, and this has happened to you many times, where you would have, let's say, somebody with a special talent in their playing, and you can recognize that. How do you, as a teacher, do you help bring out their individuality in their playing?
Well, first of all, that's also, I think it's a very important
Because that
question.
can very easily be stifled.
Very easily can be stifled. And, you know, you have to feel every student, and I know I was a student, you were a student, we all
And by the way, I'm only asking that because I feel that you've helped bring that out more in me, and so, but you haven't quite told me, like, there's a process. I mean, you're very sensitive and psychologically sensitive to each student, and I feel that you approach each student very differently. There's just one way that you
Yeah.
teach people.
Well, yeah, I believe that, for example, some person will bring a piece of music that he's being assigned, and his first instinct, of course, to do a lot of stupid things, a lot of, you know. But
As most
I
young
know,
students
we
do,
all,
yeah.
yes, a
We
lot
all
of
did it.
some people, some of the stupid things he listened to the internet, and he liked these fingerings or that, but he didn't quite understand why they did this fingering. But he thought, oh, it's cool, so I'm going to do it. So all kinds of things which are
Guilty.
well, not all kinds of things that, everybody probably does, but it's not for the right reasons,
Right.
It's like wearing somebody else's clothes. It's
Yeah.
might be okay, but it's not yours,
Right.
I believe that every piece that a person should play, he should try to tailor it to himself. But from all this chaos of stupidity that he brings, there is every once in a while an idea that is being want to be born. It's something, could be in a phrasing, could be in a nuance, could be in the style. There is something that is real. And when you see it, and even if it's very badly executed, but if you see that something wants to come out, I'm talking about, even for two phrases, you should not,
As a teacher.
even if it is not quite correct, you should try to encourage these ideas to come up, because then a person feels that he is the owner of his own interpretation. Even though if it's not quite there.
I feel like you did that. I ask this question because I feel like with me, you would, from my experience studying with you, I would do something and it would be musically wrong. But your instinct would be, okay, this came to him naturally. So I'm going to show him a different idea and see if it comes, we can meet somewhere in the middle so that there's something that comes out of him naturally. And I feel like, and I do remember you told me back when I was still studying with you, you told me that a teacher can have the greatest musical idea ever, but if it doesn't come from the student, if it doesn't come naturally from the student, it'll never sound good.
No, of course. It will never be convincing, it will never be right. And even if he does all the right original Bowings, and even if he does all the original slurs, and if he does exactly the dynamics, you never came out of a concert and talk to your friend and you will say, wow, what an incredible concert. He did all the original Bowings.
He used the Baronreiter edition.
He did the burner. I mean, it's just, we say that, but there is something behind that what makes a great performance.
Well, I would say it's a little bit of proportions. I mean,
Of
you
course.
want to bring out your voice while still honoring and respecting the composer's voice.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Of course, you have to honor and respect the composer, but, you know, it's, we struggle with all this all our lives,
Yeah.
What is, the idea is not what's written in the music, in the notes. It's what's not written in the music. That's
Uh-huh.
that's what you have to look for.
Yeah.
What's written, it's obvious.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make a great performance.
What makes a great performance?
A great performance, also this is so incredibly subjective, you will ask all my colleagues and then you will sit, 5 people will sit and we will hear the same performance, and after that the opinions vary like, oh my
Well,
God.
if you put the two of us together, you'll get 3 opinions.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But in your opinion, what makes a great performance?
First of all, you have to, in my opinion, a great performance also is very much depending on the listener. Because the listener sometimes can accept a great performance and sometimes cannot accept the same great performance.
What do you mean?
You have to be in a mood to accept a great performance. That's also, there is a certain kind of medium, because the performer is a medium between the composer and the audience. He's a medium. He's kind of the magic maker. He is delivering a message, but he's delivering it through himself, because the music is usually black and white. Mm-hmm. However deep it is, it's the you know, the person, unless he puts himself and his own personality in between the composer. Because when people tell me that, you know, you're more important than the composer,
I've heard that a lot too.
this is, or the composer is more important than you, it's, I think it's not a very effective discussion, because it's both. The composer's music would not be heard if you wouldn't play it, and it's the other way around. And you wouldn't have anything to play if the music wouldn't be there.
Right.
So to say that you're just some kind of a servant and a slave.
But it's more than just the mood of somebody in the audience that makes, or that can make or break a great performance. I mean, what is it in your mind that you hear a performance and you think, oh, this was
That this
truly
is,
great?
yeah. Most of the time, if I can be impressed by a lot of things, I can be impressed also by brilliance. Somebody, and I might not emotionally be moved, but I would say, wow, that somebody plays with such fluidity and such ease. I'm impressed by that, or so accurately, with such effortlessness. That's also impressive. But the thing that the thing is, you know, there are people that play notes. That's the third category. There are people that play with complete phrasings, and then there are people that play with complete thoughts. They have a vision in a movement. And if somebody is managing, like Isaac Stern, always, you know, sometimes he plays better than others, but there, I heard him many times live.
Well, when
And,
he was in his prime, I mean,
but
people like to judge him when he wasn't, but when
yeah,
he was in
but
his prime, he was.
even when he did not play so great at certain times, I always left the concert remembering certain thoughts, how he did. And even 30 years later, I remembered exactly what he did. And I don't want to, I would never play it like that or copy it, but the clarity of thought and presenting an idea of the music in such a personal way, that's what I would think is a great performance to me. But you know, everyone will have. I'm also very impressed with the gorgeous, beautiful tone. That's very impressive. Like, I think you have a very special, beautiful sound that is rare. That is, whenever that's something, the sound itself on the violin can make touch people, and
Thank you.
and so that's there's different elements.
Yeah. And how do you feel that? How do you feel that? Because I think that going back to pedagogy, I feel like that has a lot to do with that. The pedagogy of the past versus the way violin playing in the pedagogical world is approached today. How has it changed?
Well, you know, people. I don't know if so much the pedagogy has changed, but the standard, the unified standard, maybe has changed, and it has probably changed because of the uh, availability of recordings and availability of need to be, oh, I'm good. Why am I good? Because I try to play like a good player. And a good player is somebody that is on YouTube. You know, or somebody who is on a recording. So,
Yeah.
and that's of course makes the people want to tend to very often, you know.
But at the same time, I think that even back then, people would be inspired by a live performance that they had heard, and then they would try to emulate that in some way. But it was different because you didn't have the
Yeah,
technology.
yeah, you know, it's very, very interesting. You know, like I'm like a child, any child playing the violin. Of course, Heifetz was.
Yeah.
Besides, and I had another a little extra because we were from the same city. So that probably also had a certain pride, and for me he was. I had a picture in my bedroom of Heifetz, and every morning some people prayed to Jesus Christ, and I prayed to Heifetz. And I think I'm not the only one. I'm
And
sure
we
that
all prayed to Heifetz, I
yeah,
think.
and there was a certain kind of um, think about him, about the way he played. And I remember I heard him play once when I in Israel. He came in 1971. It was impossible. The way I got the ticket, that was a different story. But but I'm not going to tell this on the
You'll tell me after.
yeah, but but you know, that was as well, a life-changing experience. To even, you know, he was already 70 years old. But I remember I was studying at that time in New England Conservatory, and that was maybe 82, 83. The first videos came out that they were available to watch him. You know that now everybody can see it, but in those days, that was the first videos that came, and they were in the New England Conservative Library, and me and some of my friends, we
Heifetz started trending.
yeah, and we stayed. We bribed to the librarian so she would let us stay there all night.
To
And we
watch his
watched
videos.
this video from beginning to the end, from the beginning to the end, because
Wow.
it was such a
There was more value in that. Nowadays, you just click.
right,
On
right.
YouTube, you can see.
Because you know that seeing in slow motions how his hands moved and how it's like an Ethiopian runner, you know, so fluid. I mean, you try to, of course, it's him. You cannot duplicate that, and
No,
you cannot. But
people have tried.
people have tried, and you shouldn't duplicate it. But I remember how incredibly it was. I was there literally with my friends all night, and we watched this video back and forth for maybe 30 times.
I remember when I was in a music festival, and one of my friends was very much inspired by Oistrach's recording of Shostakovich's First Violin Concerto. And there's this very famous clip of him playing the cadenza. And we would, I mean, it was part of that, the art of the violin.
Yes,
When we
yes.
still had VHS cassettes, and we
Yeah.
would watch this, and we would all sit around. Remember, we sat around at the table, and we would sit there and we would watch. David Oistrakh is now playing the cadenza of this. It was an event. To sit there and watch even
Yeah.
on your screen. It was an event. Now, on your phone, you can just do a
Yeah,
little
yeah.
click and a thing and a like, and
Of course, because when
it's
something is
not.
so, it's not, it doesn't have the same impact when it's so available.
Yeah,
So the fact that it's so available, it's great. And the fact that you're so incredibly in awe and impressed is also great. But all the great can also be bad for you.
yeah.
Number one, it's so available. Number two, you can be so impressed by somebody, by your hero, and you copycat him. And which
There's
is,
also there's that, but there's also I feel when you have too much of a good thing, it will take more than just something incredibly great to make you go back and watch it again. And so that's when we get into the effects of social media on the music industry. And very often you find, I mean, we don't have to mention specific people, but you will find people on social media doing, on the violin or not on the violin, pick an instrument, it doesn't really matter, but doing outrageous things so more people will view their videos and they'll get more followers and they'll get more likes and they'll get more clicks. And it
Absolutely.
becomes, in my opinion, has nothing to do with music anymore.
Yeah, there is a always you have to always put life in proportions. I mean, great musicians are interpreters. They interpret what is an interpretation. You interpret observation of things. You interpret life, and music is part of our existence. And if how you relate to it is how you observe it. That's what.
So in this profession, especially nowadays, in this century, we have to learn things very quickly. I feel like artists back, 50, 60 years ago, maybe they didn't play even as many concerts per year as they do now. And even in my own profession, I find, it's like one program, another program. You just have to. One of my former teachers, Mr. Vamos, Roland Vamos, once said, you got to learn how to learn fast. And how important is, because, and as I said in the beginning of our interview, you really taught me how to practice, and you taught me patience because I had no patience. And so how important is the art of practicing? Because there is a process in the practice room.
Yeah.
And even if you have, sometimes it's happened to me where I remember when I was still concertmaster in the Israel Philharmonic, both concertmasters were unavailable and I had to learn everything. And I had 2 days.
I remember that.
I had 2 days to learn a
I
program.
remember that. Very stressful.
So, I mean, I can talk about, but I would love for you to discuss how important is it, the art of practicing, and what is the way to achieve the best result in the most efficient way?
Well, for every individual, it will be different because people work naturally in different ways. But I think that very often we practice, students practice when they're tired, when they didn't sleep well, and the brain is not functioning. It is, and very often when I suggest people, when you get upset, sometimes repetition is the worst thing for practicing. Totally the worst thing, because if you didn't solve the problem, don't repeat. Don't repeat passages, don't repeat phrases. You have to, and you cannot solve problems with your hands. You have to solve it first in your hand. That can be sometimes an easy solution. It's a little bit for if you work on a phrase. It's you don't negotiate the vibrato well, or the bow distribution. Or, this is all connected to the. But sometimes people get psychotic. And they, why I can't play this? Why I cannot play? And they repeat.
That was definitely me
No,
before I
I
came
mean,
to
and
you.
we are all like that. And first of all, you have to take away the psychosis when you practice. And you have to know exactly what it is that you want to accomplish. I would also recommend to put, there is nothing wrong with to say, in 20 minutes, I have to do this, this, this. And then next 20 minutes, I do this, this, this. And this gives you a parameter of time. And I think the best way to practice is to always to know what it is that you want to accomplish today, because sometimes people practice without any aim. They practice because they need to practice. And a lot of young, especially young players who have a lot of time on their hands, which could be also a big problem. When you become a professional, you don't
You
have that
practice
time
better and more efficiently.
because you don't, your time limit, you know that in 3 or 4 days you have to play this particular piece, and your natural
But
environment.
that can also lead to forming bad habits because you have so little time to learn something. So you take the music, shni, 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 and then you're less aware of your movements when you play.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, you have to always come back to the basics. When I studied with Dorothy DeLay, I remember she was always talking about you have to do your basics on everything, like you're eating your breakfast, you're like you're eating, like you're sleeping, because it's your instrumental health, and it can go bad.
I always found the most efficient way, especially if I only had a couple of days to learn something, that to practice as if I had 2 weeks, but not in the sense of I'm going to take a break now, now I'm going to go out and eat something, but in the sense of when I'm approaching the music, if the more calm I am in the practice room and approaching and having the concept of what I want to approach, the quicker I learn it, and not and you see a lot of people, they have to learn something really quickly and they just go do 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 do. What's this passage? Do do do. And it doesn't always achieve the same
Yeah,
result. I mean, I'm guilty of that too. We're all
yeah,
guilty of
yeah,
that,
absolutely.
especially when we're under
Everybody.
pressure. But my best results were always when I would just approach something calmly.
Yeah.
And funny enough, studying the score, I don't know what it is, but when I would study the score of a piece and I had a better musical understanding, it also technically helped certain passages that I was having trouble with before.
Yeah. Well, when
But
you first of all, when you study the score, you know your role.
yeah,
You know what is, you know your how you when you play with the flute or you will play with the oboe, you have to also change slightly your tone.
yeah.
You your the context is very, and also you see the complete picture.
And you mentioned Dorothy DeLay. Who would you say were your most influential teachers for you?
I mean, probably I studied also with Mr. Rosenblit, who was um, to me a incredibly imaginative musician, and
Hmm.
and his whole pedigree was quite crazy. I mean, I don't know one person who studied with Jacques Thibault, Enesco, Karol Flesch, and the only student of Bronislaw Huberman.
Wow.
He was the only student, and
Really?
he never taught. Huberman never taught, but he did so when in the 1940s. So, and he himself was a very, the way he would speak, you couldn't identify his accent because it was a fusion of French, German, and English, and it was incredibly just to hear him speak about something, there was a joy to listen. And he's played like that, and he taught like that. From a very, I learned a great deal from him, and I studied with him at the right time, because I think it's very important to study. Um, I can be a great teacher for somebody at this period and a terrible teacher for the same person in a different period. I think it's so incredibly important to
That's interesting. So a great teacher can be great or less great depending on what stage that student is
absolutely,
in their life.
absolutely. For me, for the first 2 or 3 years, Dorothy DeLay was ideal because that's exactly what I needed, and she was very great and clever, and also psychologically and knowledge. And she was really incredible. But after a certain amount of time,
It was time
you
to
need to. There is certain other things that you you had to learn. I also studied with Felix Andreevsky, who was kind of the great proponent of the Soviet school.
Was this in?
Yeah, I actually studied with him in Tel Aviv, in Israel. But when I was a teenager, and
I remember you told me some
yeah,
stories.
yeah, and it's was, but I think I was a bit too young to understand the benefits, and it put me under a lot of. I couldn't understand why I have to do all this so long. And I wanted to play, pieces. There was so much music that I loved and I wanted to play, but.
And what, maybe to finish this, what would you say you can share some, if you could share one of the funniest anecdotes or one of the funniest experiences you've had on stage, off stage, in the lesson, first thing that jumps to your mind? Or at a concert?
As an audience, I had a very funny experience. I don't know if this was the funniest, but I told this story a few days to somebody. I already completely forgot about that it happened. I have a very close friend of mine who is an Indian mathematician and a wonderful Indian classical violinist. It's our mutual friend, Purna. And well, I met him about 25 years ago, and I was completely new to Indian classical music. No, I didn't know anything about it. I don't think maybe I've heard it, but I didn't even know what it was. So he insisted for me to go to a very famous sitar player came to town. And the whole experience was so amazingly new for me. And he looked like Rasputin, the sitar player, with the long, and he had two drums behind him, and they were like, like there were two girls. And the whole experience was quite amazing. And he was a real virtuoso. And every fancy passage he did, the audience, first of all, they ate during the concert, which was, and at one point, when he did very impressive passage,
Yeah.
the whole audience were like, wow, wow, like a football game.
Yeah.
And it became...
Well, why not?
Yeah.
God forbid you should enjoy yourself at a concert.
Exactly. And the person who was right next to me was a very big man, very expressive, and he screamed the loudest after every exciting
Well, it's like at a jazz
phrase.
concert.
Yes.
Somebody does something impressive,
Yeah.
everybody
Yeah.
claps and cheers.
Right.
And he was the loudest one.
And he was the loudest one. So after the concert was over, I asked him, I told him that the fact that I sat next to him, I was really a unique experience for me, and I thanked him for screaming and yelling. I was like like a journalist looking around. And then he looked at me and he said, well, when the music speaks to you, you have to speak to it. And I find that, I don't know if this is the funniest, but I find it's a memorable.
It sticks out, for sure.
It sticks out, yeah.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for this.
Thank you, David.
This was
Great.
great. Hope we can do it again.